Hello kids! Good morning or good afternoon. It's me again, teacher Tina. Today is Science 3. So before we start, please get your workbook. So, are you ready kids? So, please open your workbook page number 31. Page 31. Page 33. Page 34, 36, and 37. So today is term test part 2. So last week we had a term test. So this is continuation of term test. So before we start, we will review our topic. So we have a review for this term test. Page 31, 33, 34, 36, and 37. So the first is page 31. So page 31 is push and pull. So when you say push, when you say pull, so this is push and this is pull. This is push, pull, push, pull. Okay. This is example of push and this is example of pull. So, page number 33. Page 33. So, type of forces. We have two types of forces. Number one, contact forces. So this is number one, contact forces. And these are example of contact forces. Type of forces we have two, contact forces and non-contact forces. So we will review the number one. So number one is these are the example of contact forces. So number one is when we push a shopping cart, this is the shopping cart, we are touching. So this is example of contact forces. So number two is play badminton. When the shuttlecock is hit, so do you call that? That is applied force. Applied force is another example of contact forces. Number three is frictional force. This is frictional force, opposite. Because frictional force is opposite direction. So, when the ball going there, direction of the ball is going to the right. So, the frictional force is left. So, that is opposite direction. They call that frictional force. This is frictional force. So, frictional force is another example of contact forces. Again, these are example of contact forces. So we will proceed to number 2, type of forces. So number 2 is non-contact forces. So these are example of non-contact forces. So number 1, page 34. So number 1 is when the ball is thrown in the air, so we have the gravitational force. So means gravitational force is an example of non-contact forces. So again, gravitational force is example of non-contact forces. Number 2 example. Number 2 example is magnetic force. So magnetic force is another example of non-contact forces. And the next example is when the same poles. This is another example of south pole, north pole. This is example of non-contact forces. So again, gravitational force, magnetic force, and same poles are example of non-contact forces. Again, we have two types. The types of forces is number 1, contact forces, and these are example. Then number 2 is non-contact forces, and these are example of non-contact forces. Okay. Next is magnet. So, page 36, magnet. So, page 36 is magnet. So, we have two. Number 1 is magnetic object, and number 2 is non-magnetic object. Again, magnet is, we have two, magnetic object and non-magnetic object. So these are the example of magnetic object. So example is, this is the magnet, and so this is, the key is magnetic object. So these are is magnetic. The key is magnetic object. So magnetic object, these are the example. Sewing needle, steel spoon. So non-magnetic object is example is ball, book, table. Okay. Next, before is, we again, magnets, we have two magnetic object, and these are the example. Non-magnetic object, and these are the example of non-magnetic object. Next, page 37. Page 37. So, attract and refill. Attract is if opposite. If opposite. North pole and south pole is attract. Next, if the same pole is North pole and North pole is repel. South pole and South pole repel. Always remember, if the same poles, repel. If opposite, that is attract. Okay, North pole and South pole attract. South pole and North pole attract. South pole and South pole repel. North pole and North pole repel. Next. So, this is continuation of term test last week. So, this is part 2 of term test. So, again, this is page 38 is push and pull. This is example. And contact force and non-contact force. Contact force, contact force, contact force, non-contact force, non-contact force, and contact force. And next is, this is magnetic object, non-magnetic object. So, please open your book, page 55, 56, and 57. Page 55. Letter H. So letter H, please fill in the blanks with push and pull. So push, then pull. Next, letter I. State the types of forces involved in the activities below. Then group the types of forces accordingly. So we have magnetic force, applied force, frictional force, gravitational force. So number 1 is applied force. So have already answered. Number 2, what is this? Magnetic, frictional force, or gravitational force. Then this one, magnetic, frictional force, gravitational force. And the last is opposite direction. So, magnetic force, frictional force, gravitational force. So, please write here which is contact forces and non-contact forces. So, number 1 is already answered. So, applied force is contact force. So, which is contact forces, magnetic, frictional force, or gravitational? Which is non-contact forces, magnetic, frictional force, or gravitational force? And page 57 is write, reveal, or attract. Reveal or attract. So, number 1 is north pole, south pole, south pole, south pole, north pole, south pole, north pole, south pole, north pole, and north pole, north pole, and north pole, then north pole and south pole. And letter K, circle the magnetic object. Again, magnetic object. So, I hope you understand term test 2 continuation. And see you again next week. Goodbye.